Un saludito a todos los fanáticos de Fanzone. Hoy le tenemos una conversación bien interesante e importante para todos los fanáticos del béisbol. Vamos a hablar con uno de los mejores agentes ahora mismo en los Estados Unidos. Nada más y nada menos que el ejecutivo vicepresidente de la división de béisbol de Wasserman, David Chanock. Chanock, we can say?
Chanock. Nick Chanock, like two Nicks.
Okay, so we are here because you represent Jose Berrio, La Máquina, and Javi Baez. How do you get to know those kind of players, those kind of people? Because they're way different. How do you manage them? How do you know them? Where do you know them?
I've represented Javi since he was in AAA, so going on about 10 years. Jose, 1 or 2 years into the big leagues, so probably 6 or 7 now. In my business, when you're in the business of representing the most talented players in the world, you scale the globe to find them. My travels have brought me from Puerto Rico to Japan and everywhere in between. And I don't need to tell you that Javi and Jose are special players, and they will always be special players. And my venture into Puerto Rico began even years before that with Carlos Correa. The first time I was in Puerto Rico, we actually at Wasserman had done Carlos Correa's initial draft deal when the Houston Astros drafted him. And a lot of things kind of transpired to get from A to B, but one of the things that I found bonded me to both Javi and then eventually Jose was that they really wanted their voice and their story to be told and heard and listened to. Javi became one of the biggest stars in the game, spending, from winning the World Series to runner-up the MVP. He's won the Silver Slugger, the Gold Glove. He's been on the base of the video game in just about every magazine that exists. One of the most popular players, very, very long time. And I think it was really having a plan and then executing it that I think really was what drew us to each other. And with Jose, a lot of his plan, I think, to revive baseball in Puerto Rico, to spend considerable amounts of time giving back. A big part of his plan is just getting launched as we stand today. So, I find that they're both have become very special to me, like members of my family. And while we have a lot of differences in our background, I think that we've been able to find a commonality for, I think they appreciate and respect that I prepare and dedicate myself to representing them in the same way that they prepare and dedicate themselves to doing excelling on and off the field. And they're really a great spokespeople for the island of Puerto Rico, and I'm sure are a source of tremendous pride for many of the people there.
You talk about them and how you feel like they're family to you. What people don't understand about agents, because when we talk about agents in the sports industry or every industry, everybody think about years and money. And what other aspect of the things that you do you think that are as important as the years and the money the artist, the athlete get?
So if you think about a player, that an agent generally will negotiate 5 major contracts over the course of the player's life. The first contract would be the draft contract. The second contract is often not until years later, until a player hits arbitration, which they go through 3 different times, which in many cases is, I think, the most challenging part, at least intellectually. Free agency is a different challenge, but there is different challenges of both. And a free agent contract, so a draft contract, 3 arbitration contracts, and a free agent contract. And in the event that some special players get more than 1 bite to the apple, that happens, and that's great. But when you think about talking to somebody every day or every couple of days for a number of years, in often cases 10, 15, sometimes as many as 20 years, the amount of time that we spend actually physically negotiating with the team are, less than 10% of the time that we spend. But I like to think that a lot of the time that we spend with the players, helping them to cast themselves in the most favorable light in the circles of baseball. So I'll use Barrios as an example. You know, Barrios in his contract extension with the Toronto Blue Jays signed there for a 7-year deal. And that winter in free agency, the Cy Young winner, Robbie Ray, and a really elite pitcher, Kevin Gausman, signed for less money in less years on the free agent market than Jose did as a, as an extension candidate. So you ask the question of, why does that come to be? And I think of sitting up there, the podium with Ross Atkins, and he was actively talking about how it was the quality of person that Jose was. We don't just have a great baseball player, but we have a great person. And I think that that is a really important thing that enters into not just an agent, but what kind of people you have around you. And I think that a big part of what I do is helping these players to bring out their true selves so that teams want to create long-term relationships with them.
You have been, almost 20 years now in this industry?
Yeah, this is 19.
19. How was those first conversations discussing contracts? You were 22, 23 years? How they view you? Because there is a table, there is 5, 6, 7 people that has been doing this for 30 years, and you walk in and you start talking another language with stats and all those stuff. How they view you?
I will remember very explicitly my first time that I was in the room negotiating a large-scale deal was for Yu Darvish with the Texas Rangers. And I was in the room with Arn Tellem, who was my first mentor, and across the table from us negotiating was John Daniels and Thad Levine. Thad is now the general manager of the Twins, and John is an advisor to the Rays, but he was the youngest GM, I believe, in history. I think he was like a 26 or 27-year-old general manager. And Nolan Ryan, who is obviously a Texas legend. And in the course of that negotiation, which was very stressful because there was a posting fee, a deadline, we were up all night, 2 nights in a row, negotiating through the night, contacting Japan. There was a lot of, in many ways, my first negotiation was one of the most unique ones. And I remember one of the nights I went and was talking about analytical statistics, talking about finding ways to bridge gaps. And one of the things I was suggesting was paying Yu Darvish $1 million for hitting 180 inning threshold, $1 million for 190 inning threshold, just finding different concepts to try and to bridge the gap. And I remember Nolan Ryan almost got up and walked out of the room, and Nolan Ryan was like, under no circumstances are we going to pay him $1 million for 180 innings pitched, because that is not the Texas Ranger way, and this guy better throw 180 innings was sort of his math. And then I went back that night and looked at it, and Nolan Ryan had thrown 180 innings before the All-Star break in his rookie season, and I think threw 340 innings and 42 starts. So the idea of asking for $1 million to somebody, it was a very, very fast learning experience for me, because while the media and a lot of people talk about, modern analytics and the analytics movement taking over a lot of the game today, that a lot of these owners are, they use the analytics as advisory, and they use the general manager's decisions as advisory. They take them very seriously. But that, at the end of the day, these are people and humans. And it's not surprising that Nolan Ryan might feel a certain way, or that, Ross Atkins might feel a certain way, or Jed Hoyer. You can go down the list. So when you go through all of these different negotiations, it's really equally as important to understand who you're talking to, because some teams will want to get really into the weeds on analytics and others won't. I was very fortunate that at the time that I was breaking into the industry, and as a 21-year-old kid right out of college, that it was the analytic movement was really getting off the ground. Moneyball had kind of taken flight, and these teams started to shift to young general managers like Theo Epstein and John Daniels and Andrew Friedman, and away from kind of old former scouts or whoever was running the teams at those times. And so there was definitely an opportunity for me that, today I go to the winter meetings and there's 20 kids that are statistical minded that want to get into the baseball industry. When I was breaking into it, it was a new frontier. And I always laugh because I wrote my thesis in college as an economics major, and I was going to go to Wall Street. but I had written my thesis about wins above replacement player. It was called WARP. So modern day war was called WARP. And WARP, for lack of a better word, was the most cutting edge statistic. It was developed by Nate Silver, Baseball Prospectus, and Bill James. And today it's, on the back of baseball cards and probably on MLB Network more than any other statistic other than home runs or RBIs or something like that. So it's funny to watch what used to be an advanced statistic become what I would call a more mainstream statistic, because a WAR is, while still advanced in some ways, like these teams are using very, very different ways to calculate it than they were many years ago.
So you went from learning in that aspect of what Nolan Ryan told you that we're not going to pay, to then going and becoming a master in arbitration cases. You were the first guy in the 21st century to win 2 cases in the same year. So that is not easy. It's not easy to win one. You won 2 with Mark Trumbo, right? And Vince Worley.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me, or tell the people how difficult it is to go to arbitration and present your case, because the player has a case, the team has a case. And you have 30 minutes to present your case?
Hour, yeah.
And how do you do it?
It usually takes hundreds of hours of work, and now we have a really great team. For many years, as I came up through it, I kind of oversaw the arbitration production and department. Now I have someone who does, his name is Mike Mariano, who's a brilliant young executive at our company and does a lot of it, case building and whatnot. I'm a lawyer. I went to law school at night while working full time, and I think that I had a couple of different firms want to talk to me about becoming a litigator, which never was really interesting to me, but I was always going to do this. But I would tell you that arbitration is an incredibly complex and specific area of the law, and it is something where I think we have been able to really transform the way the cases are presented and thought through by taking an approach where we really want the player to be educated about his process. Jose Barrios went to an arbitration and lost his arbitration. Lost the arbitration because he was trying to break a record or a threshold that hadn't been broken in 15 or 16 years. And he was very well aware of the risks that he took. I'm still surprised we lost that one, but what I would say is I went through this process in great detail and explained to him with a 30 or 40 page document about why we were going to do, what we were going to do, how, and allowed him the choice to go and decide what he wanted to do. I always think that our job is to make a suggestion, and then the players, they're up to them to decide. The arbitration process, while incredibly complex and very niche market, for lack of a better word, is something that is constantly evolving, and is something where you go there and you put your neck out on the line and you go to war. And I think that in any war, big or small, preparation is always the key. And what I always say to the players before is we're never going to lose the battle of preparation. You're always going to feel as if you are the most prepared, both in what to expect and in the negotiating strategy leading up to it. So this year, for example, we went to Taylor Ward and we went and won the case against the Angels. And I called Taylor, the union had called and said we had won, and I called him to tell him that we had won the case. And, I said, congratulations, you've won your case. And he goes, congratulations to you guys. That was an incredible amount of work I know you put in. It's hundreds of hours, but it's something that you have to really love to do it. And I really am, proud of the passion that our entire group exemplifies in this thing, because I think it is an area where the Wasserman Group is the preeminent group in this, and it speaks to a lot of people well beyond me.
You negotiated, I think, we can say 9 years ago, 2 big contracts. You negotiated Giancarlo and Nolan. And what stats do you utilize in those situations? Because it was 2 very different situations. With Nolan, there is a stigma that he played in Colorado, that he was getting advantage of the playing field, all those stuff, because we know in Colorado the altitude and all those stuff. And then you had Giancarlo, who was having or had an amazing year, and then he got the extension. What stats you bring in those type of conversation? We're talking about in that time 2 superstars of the game.
So one of the really important things in this business is to have good partners and to work collaboratively. Joel was a mentor to me and a partner to me for every bit of the 19 years, and we've been side by side on many, many, many things over the course of it. And one of the things that I think makes our relationship really special is that we're very different. I like to go fast. He likes to go slow. I'm much more specific. He's much more theoretical. I remember Theo Epstein one time calling us the odd couple. Joel and I are very different, but we would have what is one of the best marriages imaginable over the course of 20 years, because we kind of check our egos at the door, and we argue sometimes in front of the player, because we believe that a diversity of perspectives put together leads us to the best result. And, Stanton and Nolan's negotiations both took on very different lives. Nolan's took several years. And I think that, it's funny, some agents make these big fancy books and present them to their players as if, they're going to go negotiate with, they're going to show them something that they're going to go and do. And I think that maybe works in the arbitration case, but in free agency, it really is a lot about, especially at that level at 325 and 260 minutes, really about ownership level stuff. And Joel just went through this again with Yamamoto, the general manager. When you get above a certain pay grade or you're making record deals, the deal is really fundamentally between the player, Giancarlo or Nolan, and the owner, Jeffrey Loria. And I remember it was November 17th when the press conference happened. I know this because it's my mother's birthday and the day that Barrios' deal and Stanton's deal got finished. I always remember it. And I remember Jeffrey Loria saying to me at the table in the kitchen afterwards, saying, this was the most expensive birthday present I ever bought myself, or something like that, because it was his birthday that day too. And I was had a good chuckle about that. But where I would go with it is it's very important to understand that these deals and deals like that come together in a way that people think is very different. It's not as if Joel and I are going in there with a mountain of stats and talking about why his exit velocity, which is pretty outstanding for Stanton, or why Nolan's ball carry is going to play in Colorado versus Boston or Chicago or something like that. I think a lot of it has to do, again, I got my start in this business because of analytics, but I've come to find that the really big deals are done a lot more on people. And, Nolan Arenado is the exact type of person you want to build your organization around. He's one of the hardest workers you'll ever see. He never, ever, ever takes a play off, and he is a meticulously competitive preparer. And I think that, again, it's really about finding the right deal and understanding and assessing risk. And in both those cases, they ended up being extremely large deals. But it was really less about the analytics in those situations and more about finding a way so that the collective visions of the organization and the player lined up. I think that one of the things where analytics really enters into it is that you really want to understand ahead of time who your player is, because there are certain players that have statistics that maybe don't necessarily match up with what you see above or underneath. So a lot of our analytical research, we have an entire team of people doing this, is looking into really understanding your player. So while I don't think that you're going to go tell a team that because Giancarlo Stanton has this type of exit velocity that you're going to extract more money from them. But understanding why, they're going to value him helps you frame what your negotiating strategy is. And, I feel like our process is, Yamamoto just did the largest pitcher contract in history, and testament to Joel for that, but it was more testament to the entire group's process in understanding who he was.
You have talked about the personality, the importance in those kind of negotiations. That can be the difference on getting a big contract to getting a normal contract. Yes. For the extender of the baseball player. If you had to give a percentage of how important is the person, because you are going there negotiating, and you say his value is 200 millions, and you say if the person they are looking every day is great and he's doing the job, the other person is going to say, it's a lot of money, but he's worth it. So the conversation we're having, the personality have come in many occasions. So for you, that is something you didn't see in the beginning of this journey, but now you understand that more than any other thing.
I think it's a really great point, and I think if you really drill down to the bottom of it, baseball players are around each other for 162 games, and really every day in the clubhouse, your personality you can't hide from. So at the end of the day, who you are, I think one of the things that makes Javi Baez such a great player is that he's the same guy every day. He can go 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts and the next day hit 2 home runs and win the game. He literally comes in every day with the same mentality, and that's something that is very, very hard to do. And most of the players that have ever played with him would tell you that, struggling or on a torrid hot streak. And so what I think is that like your real personality comes out over time with these organizations. And I think that, there are certain players that have statistics that are much better than perhaps their contracts warrant, because I think there are things about the quote unquote way they do it that gives teams pause and hesitation. And I think that not only are we selling or guiding our players to, we're trying to get them the best contract possibly, of course, but what we're also trying to do in the space between is to teach them and to advise them in a way, in a manner that makes them most desirable, so the team does want to make a long-term investment. There's a couple of players over the last couple of years that have come and sought and wanted to come meet with us to talk about, us representing them, or we've refused, that are very prolific, high-paying players, because I don't think it really fits the type of personality that we're looking for. And I think that's a privilege to be able to do that in the agent business. But I think that it's because we're really looking for a very specific type of person and player, because you want someone that's willing to listen and learn. Because I think there's this common misconception among the players that if I go hit 30 home runs or I go do X, Y, and Z, that I'm therefore going to get paid. And there's some like random market, and they don't understand that these are owners and people sometimes. And the way you do it matters. And, today I would argue that like what kind of the most important statistic in modern baseball is probably pitch decisions or swing decisions and which hallways they hunt in. And I think that players that make good swing decisions, are often, take Juan Soto as an example, or JP Crawford had a great year. We have another guy, Lars Newbar, who does it. Like these guys have value that extends way beyond, RBIs and things that like, or even, weighted runs created or whatever advanced statistic you want to throw out there. So it's a constant effort to help these players to understand and learn that the way they go about their business is often as important as the result.
You have talked about the relationship you have with your clients. What do you think about the new contracts that are being given in Major League Baseball to 19, 20, 21-year-old baseball players that we can say are team-friendly deals, not player-friendly deals? How do you view those type of contracts?
So I think that ultimately you always have to remember that you work for the player, that the player makes to make those decisions. But I think I always tell players that we begin negotiating your contract 5 or 6 years before the team ever approaches you. I think that, in our business, unfortunately, in the agent business, we get paid for the life of a contract. So the second the contract is ink is dry on the contract, the agent's fee is vested for the duration of it. I think I saw a statistic that like 80 or 90% of the deals that were done, I think it was like 35 out of 37 at some point. Ken Rosenthal did an article, I don't remember because I talked to him about it, but are done by agents that the player doing the extension was the largest player in that particular agent's book of business. So what happens is that, if you go and you take a player in the draft and he's a top 15 pick and he's a great player and he's a big prospect and he goes to the futures game, he's still 4 or 5 years away often from paying a fee to an agent, and it can get very expensive to service him, travel, that kind of stuff. And if you don't have Stantons and Darvishes and Arenados and Baez's paying the bills, it can become, I start to think that the agent's best interest or the agent's own self-interest can interfere with the player's interest. And I'm a big believer that most of those deals that have 2 and 3 options are detrimental to the sport. Now, every player has the right to choose and go and do it, but most of the general managers know darn well what they're doing. And I saw it. I'm not going to go and pick on anybody in particular because I just don't. It's unbecoming. But you see these guys that are signing without playing a day in the major leagues. And I remember a big part of when I was recruiting Javi Baez was he had a small agent at the time, and I had said to him, like, if they come and approach you about an extension before you even get there, like, you should hang up the phone and, come meet me. And because the agent is going to suggest that this was a good signing. And I think I kind of remember I can't remember exactly, but there was some discussion about like something that literally would have ended up being like 1/10 of Javi's career earnings. And so the point is that like it might seem like a lot of money at the time, but getting these players to understand that like, look, they have to make the decision that's best for them, and ultimately we serve the players. But if you educate them properly, I think you see quite undeniably why those type of deals are very detrimental. And I have for a long time encouraged the union to try and discourage these type of deals, perhaps find a way to limit agents' fees if there are multiple club options on deals, because what it really does is it just tanks the market. And I think that our business is so competitive, but I think about like how different certain types of earnings could be had, players made different contract decisions.
You talk about the opt-out, those
Yes.
clauses. Obviously, you're an agent. You want your client to have the opt-out, not
Yes.
the team. Like you did with Nolan. Nolan
Yes.
had the opt-out. He decided to opt in with
Yes.
St. Louis. But how you sell your player that you're going to make this kind of money, and if you do this performance, you can go up to this kind of money, but the team is the one that has the control because they have the team option in
Yes.
year 8, 9, 10 of the deal. How do you think they sell that to the player? Because or they say, well, you're signing $200 million, that's a lot of money, but how will you approach a guy? Let's say a player calls you and say, this agent is telling me they have a $200 million offer in the table, and these are the clauses, and these are the payments and all those stuff. How do you tell a player, don't take the $200 million?
It's hard, and that's why you need to build the trust with them. I think Barrios walked from 45, 68, 75, 100. I could go, he walked from several along the way. I think that what's really, really critical is that you have to build that trust, and it comes with time, and it comes with education, and it comes with having a plan and enacting the plan. And something as small as getting their equipment on time, or having a conversation when they have an injury, or all these different things that you build trust. Trust is built and earned over time. And so I remember Stan, the first offer they wanted to offer him was $40 million with the W Hotel, and this was a couple years prior to the Monster one. And of course, like, to these players who haven't ever really had that kind of money, it can seem like a tremendous amount. But one of the things I always say to players is, they negotiate. Often they look at their bank account and they say, okay, I have $1 million in it, or 500, that whatever their number is, and they think, wow, this is going to change my life and I'll never do it again. But what they don't realize is often is the case that they have a lot more money in their bank account, even if they were to get hurt, even if things were go wrong, like they're still going to be invested because the system rewards you as you get further up through it. So in the complexities of that, getting a player to understand that while you only see $1 million in your bank account, you really have already banked 10 because of what you've done. It changes the leverage, and it changes their risk tolerance. So these are, again, these things that where it comes back to education. I think when I see those deals, it just means that an agent did a poor job, in my opinion, of educating his guy. And it's often, and look, ultimately, at the end of the day, if that deal comes across one of our players' desks and the player wants to take it, then we give our advice and we take it. We serve the players. But I've successfully been able to dissuade players from doing extensions with extremely favorable results, and it's just part of the hard work that you put in every day. And I'm extremely against those type of deals because I don't think the player most of the time was properly educated. He just has some agent that says, trust me, I know, I'm the only one that cares about you, I'm the only one that knows, don't worry about anybody else, it's all about yourself. And the player listens to it, and fortunately then 5 years later probably pretty unhappy with how it turned out.
I want to finish with this. We were talking off camera, and I told you, I think people don't understand how big of a signing was Yu Darvish when he was in Texas. You were in that signing, you were in that process versus Yamamoto right now. Because I know Darvish was 135, 135?
His first contract somewhere around 112 with all the posting fees in.
So we're talking about Yamamoto is over 300.
Yes.
But the hype was different, and you worked in that deal, and your agency worked in Yamamoto's deal also. Who do you think was the bigger star heading to the Major League when the deal happened for both?
Well, I can tell you that Yu Darvish, when he came to the United States, was on the backs of a couple of players that I think had came and not reached the very high expectations. One would be Matsuzaka, or to a different extent, Arabu before that, or Kazumatsui. They were these guys. Hideki had been good, but these guys came with these really outside expectations and had kind of failed. And I think that it was not failed, but not dominated. And then I think Darvish really was a catalyst for really showing that the Japanese players can excel at the major league level. So he was I'll say a pioneer, but I think he readjusted the perception. And Darvish is a big physical pitcher, and he is, when he was over in Japan, he was really a rock star. He was kind of a David Beckham crossover type of star. He was a really just an incredibly popular player. I think that today, with Darvish still in the league, and Ohtani has come over and become the face of the league in many capacities and is such an unbelievably gifted player, I think that there is a lot more belief and excitement about the Japanese players because they can scout and measure them better with the modern data and tools. The other part of it is that I think that they're a little bit more of a proven commodity. So I think Yamamoto joins a fraternity of really great Japanese players. I'm really excited to see where he goes. I think that it's not really fair to compare one to the other because they're both their own entities. I think that I think they both will enact change and positivity for the game as they grow it, and I'm excited to see the way that Yamamoto does it. Everything that I've heard and know, and Joel's just did an incredible job on that contract, but everything that I know about it, he's a really hardworking guy who's dedicated to his craft, and I have every confidence that he will excel at the highest level in Major League Baseball.
I have a great friend that works with me, and he always tell Major League is getting owned by Latinos, the players, and he always says, in the future the league will be mostly Latino. How do you view the market of Latinos player right now? There is a player that could get a lot of money right now in this off season that is coming with Soto, but how do you see the whole community of players?
I think that the Latin American community is very prevalent in baseball. I think it comprises about 30%, 28%, depending on what groups you include in that community. I think there's baseball in the Caribbean and South America is really, and Mexico as well, is a really, really popular sport. Something that we want to regrow it in Puerto Rico, one of the missions of Jose and Javi, Sugar, and guys going forward. I think that baseball has continued to be as popular in those communities, and I think it's up to both the collaboration of the Players Association and the league to grow the game in those areas. I think that Juan Soto, if you ask me, would probably end up signing the largest contract in history. I think he will surpass Ohtani's. I value Ohtani's very differently than the 700. I value it at a much different number because of all the deferrals, but that's a different discussion. But I think he will end up setting a new bar for it because he's a really talented player. But with that said, I think there's a lot of things that the Latin community brings to the game, a lot of excitement. I think they really, Javi really captivated the young viewers in his run in Chicago to the World Series. And I think that like the excitement that a lot of the Latin players bring to the game is critical to the next stage of baseball in the more global economy.
That Juan Soto point that you make there is an interesting topic. We're not going to talk about that right now because we don't have more time. But off camera, you have to tell me what you said and why, because I have made that point a lot of time in the program, and many people look at me like you're crazy. But I was the one that defended him in Puerto Rico when he didn't sign with Washington. The extension, I didn't like that extension at all. Yeah. So, but we're going to talk about that off camera. And then maybe I do a video saying to people, well, Nick told me this and that. But great time, Nick. Really great time, great info. I think that the people in Puerto Rico and in Latin America are going to love this interview. I really do.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you.